Your messaging is a critical business foundation that underpins so much more. Your content, emails, website copy, and offers all need to be built on a solid foundation of core messaging that resonates. So if you want to up-level your messaging so it ignites action takers to engage with you and buy from you, come along to my Resonate workshop on the 18th of June. You can find out more and register at tashcorbin.com/resonate. I hope to see you there. Question. Do you look at other people launching their courses, programs, or new offers and wonder why they seem to be able to get results and be far more successful than others? Are you interested in understanding why certain launches might work really well and why others might not be as effective? Well, if so, I have a brilliant podcast episode for you today because I'm going to share with you some first launches of courses and products that I've seen over the years and what their competitive advantage was. Now, one of the reasons why I love doing this is that we often see people who teach launching and who are sharing their launch results get very focused on the things that they didn't have. You see people say, I was able to generate a 5-figure launch and I didn't even spend any money on ads, or how I made 30 sales of my course and I only had a tiny mailing list. And yes, that's often true. Sometimes it's not, but it's often true, and that's what they're sharing. But what they don't do is dive into, well, then why were they able to make it work? What else did they have access to, or what other competitive advantage did they have that meant that they were still able to launch successfully? So it's going to be a nice, juicy one. This is episode number 479 of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. And that means you can find all the relevant links and the show notes for today's episode over at tashcorbin.com/479. Let's do it. Hello, I'm Tash Corbin, a business strategist and mentor based on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. The mission of this podcast is to help heart-centered entrepreneurs to make more money, and in doing so, change the world for the better. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra people. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. The launches I'm going to be sharing about in today's episode are not my launches. They are the launches of peers and clients of mine that I have witnessed and had backstage passes to over the years. Now, we often see the shiny result of these launches and people celebrating their successes and their wins, but we often don't get enough of the detail to really assess whether that launch model or strategy is going to work for us and whether we have areas in our own business or assets and resources that we need to gain access to in order to be able to replicate those kinds of results with that kind of strategy. So this allows us to peek a little bit behind the curtain, and to ensure confidentiality, I will just be referring to people by a number. So I will talk about case number 1, case number 2. I won't be providing any detail that could allow you to figure out who it was or anything along those lines. So the first one that I want to talk about is case number 1. And this was a client of mine who sold 42 spots in their first ever course launch, and it was a $995 price point. Now, we worked together to map out the launch and the structure of this particular program, and we just did it over the course of 4 sessions. It wasn't a long engagement that I was working with this person for. But one of the competitive advantages that this person had, which meant they were able to have such a successful first ever course launch, was that they had previously spent 4 years working one-on-one with clients. They had built up an audience, they had built up trust with that audience, and they had a lot of hot leads for their course because there were a lot of people in their audience who wanted to work with them one-on-one, but they were charging so handsomely for their one-to-one services that for some people it was on a wish list. So when this course was first announced, they were able to get some really early sales from people who had previously not been able to work with them one-to-one, but were already sold on the effectiveness of what they did and how brilliant they were as a provider. So we often see stories where people say, wow, my first ever course and I've done my launch and, I've made 5 figures in sales. This was a multi-5-figure launch of this particular offer. And you wouldn't necessarily know to ask the question, well, how long have you previously been in business before you created the course? How many people were on your mailing list? What level of relationship and connection did you have with your existing audience? And this person had a really strong connection with their existing audience. They had a pretty decent mailing list. I think it was about 2,000 people, but they could tell me details about pretty much every single person on that mailing list and every single person from that list who signed up for their initial webinar when they were launching the course. So the time in the market and the time connecting with and building relationships with their existing audience, as well as the high ticket price point of the other ways that people could work with them until the course existed, were serious markers and competitive advantage that led to such a successful first ever launch of a course. Now, let's dive into case number 2. Now, this was a peer of mine, and we were in a program together, and we were also in a smaller group experience together several years later. And it was actually several years later that I was able to get more insights about this particular first ever launch, because I'd heard from this person in the course we're in about their first ever launch, and their first ever launch was this spectacular success. And in the course that we were in, it was kind of shared in subsequent launches of the program to say, look at this person. They created and launched their course with my program, and they had this spectacular first ever launch. And it was actually a few years later that I was able to ask some more follow-up questions about how that launch result came about. And there was a lot of stuff that was never shared publicly about why it was so successful. So this person started their business probably 6 months before their first launch, and their first ever launch was of a course that was $1,495 US, and they made over $100,000 in sales from their first ever course launch. They didn't have time in the market with their existing audience for their existing business, but they, as their competitive advantage, already had $1 million business in another business model. And as part of that previous business, they had a very extensive network and the capacity to spend significantly on ads. In fact, this person spent more on their ads than they made in sales in that first ever launch. But because that first ever launch was so successful and they were rolled out as a case study for their mentor, and they were spotlighted over and over again in the course group, in conversations on calls, on social media by other peers as being this amazing person who had this amazing result, it then meant that it was worth them spending more than they made in that first launch because it created an amazing reputation for them. It significantly expanded their organic reach. And then they ended up pivoting their program to be about launching and launch orientated. They became a launch expert. So their competitive advantage there was an existing extensive network from a previous business and the success of a previous business that then meant they had the capacity and resources to significantly invest in ad spend. Now, the third case study that I want to share is a client of mine. Now, this client did 4 sessions with me for launch planning and preparation. They already knew what their program was going to be. They already had all of that kind of mapped out, but they needed help to be able to launch that program and do it quickly as well. And so this person had a program that was $5,000. It had only had 30 spots because it was the first ever launch and it was very high touch. And so they needed to limit the spaces to 30 and they sold out all of those spaces. So yet another 6-figure launch in terms of total sales. And this person didn't do any ads either. But what was their competitive advantage? Why were they able to sell out that program so quickly? Well, they were already an industry leader. They hadn't ever offered a course or a group program before in teaching in this space, but they were a highly sought after speaker for industry events and conferences by their peers and also by other industry leaders. They had previous direct-to-customer experience, but they mentored other business owners as like one-to-one, just sort of pick my brains kind of stuff whenever they were asked. And they were a very sought after speaker and leader within the industry. So one of the things that we did to ensure that the launch was going to work was that we actually quickly validated the course idea, the program idea, by setting up a wait list. And if you are interested in learning more about creating and promoting waitlists as a part of validating your course or your membership, then I'll make sure I link to, I've got a waitlist for my waitlist toolkit, and that will be coming out later this year. I've had a few delays to getting that out, but it will be coming out later this year. So we created a waitlist for the program and then promoted that waitlist for just 1 week. And in that 1 week, they had nearly 100 people sign up for the waitlist. And we had said when we promoted the waitlist what the price point was going to be. And they got over 70, maybe 80 people signed up for that waitlist. So it was close to 100 from memory. And so we had validated very quickly with very few communications about this program that there definitely was demand from other providers in their market and who saw this person as a very strong industry leader, as someone that they wanted to be mentored by. And they were very open to learning from them in a group learning situation. And so it was an amazing first launch, and it was such a fun one to be able to watch along. But see there's a different form of competitive advantage. So if that person decided that they wanted to become a launch mentor or share a case study of their launch, and they said, I'd never done a group program to my peers before. I didn't have a mailing list specifically dedicated to this particular niche. I didn't spend any money on ads. I didn't have a big mailing list. I didn't even have any content that I'd shared on social media before that was appealing to this particular segment of the market, but I was able to have a 150K launch. You would be like, wow, like what did you have then? And it is this reputation as an industry leader and previously mentoring other peers on a one-to-one basis, just as they asked and as they reached out and said, hey, can you help me with this? Or I know that you do this. Can you help me learn a bit more about it as well? And then to be able to validate that that was enough of a competitive advantage to have a viable program with that waitlist was an epic way to very quickly ensure that this was going to work out and it was worthwhile putting the time and energy into launching it. All right, the next one is a VIP client that I worked with, case study number 4. And this person and I spent 3 months together refining their one-to-one lead generation and conversion before launching a membership that was $300 per year kind of price point. And so this person had a $7,500 first launch. So that included having 26 people sign up to their membership in the first ever launch of it. Some paid the year up front. Some paid for VIP membership, and some paid for just their first 3 months. So there were 3 options throughout the launch process. There was just buy 3 months to try it out. There was pay for the year up front, and then there was pay for the year and some VIP sessions. And so they ended up with $7,500 in hand for that first launch, and then 26 members. So it's been a couple of years since we've done that one, and they've since gone to, I think, 120, 130 members since that first ever launch. And their actual competitive advantage was that they were a local celebrity. They had a great network of other people who were similar to them and wanted to achieve the goal that the membership helped them to achieve. And they had all of those people in their network sharing about this membership as well. So they actually reached out to probably, I reckon we made a list of 150 people in the end that were in their local network, that were really raving fans of what they did, and that were likely to be interested in the first launch of the membership. And we didn't ask them to join the membership. We didn't promote the membership to them. We instead asked them, would they be willing to help spread the word about this membership when it was launched? And we had about 50% of those people said yes. A good portion of them said yes, and I'd love to find out about it when it's launched as well, because I would love to join. And so we created some lead generation strategies, some conversion strategies that were very high touch, high connection, and also that gave people lots of resources to be able to help spread the word. So we pre-wrote a bunch of content, posts, emails that we sent out to the people who said they'd help share it. And we wrote different versions. So we wrote a version that was like, I'm joining this membership. If you'd like to join too, here's why I'm joining and here's what it is about. So I'd love for you to come and join me in it. So because of their existing network and that local celebrity factor, and leaning into that competitive advantage that they had, right, what we were doing was looking for what was going to be the most effective way to Tap into the resources and advantages that they had rather than trying to make up for the stuff that they didn't. Now, you might be sitting listening to this thinking to yourself, wow, like I've perhaps done that, where you do have a really strong existing network, and instead of leaning into what you have, you've created a launch strategy or a launch plan based on trying to fix the things you don't have and create new advantages or new assets or new audiences rather than leaning into what you have. Now, if you don't have any of these competitive advantages, that doesn't mean you cannot have an epic first launch. It's that you need a strong, validated strategy. So the strategy that you do choose to embrace for launching your product or service needs to ensure that it capitalizes on what you have, and that you validate, that you've got validation, you've got evidence that this launch is going to be worthwhile. So validating the product. Is this a product that has demand? Is this a product that people understand? Is this a product that people get excited about and want to know more about and are willing and able to invest in? Now, there are several ways you can validate that product. You can do a wait list. You can run a pilot program. You can do a founding members launch that's at a significant discount. You can do market research and surveys. There's so many different ways that you can validate a product. I lean towards validation strategies that require people to pay something in order to purchase it, because there's nothing more validating than people saying, yes, it's what I want. Yes, I think it'll help me. Here is my money. And whether that's a discounted way of doing it or a pilot offer or asking people to make an early commitment, there are some really cool ways that you can play with that product validation strategy. A wait list is my second favorite way of doing it. So having that wait list where people know what the price point is likely to be, they know what it's about and what it's going to deliver, and they're willing to give you their email address simply to find out when it's launched and get in early. Then we need to also validate that you have an audience or a way to reach them. So do you have a strategy that taps into your existing audience and their existing audience and network? Or do you have a validated strategy to reach a new audience or to really tap into the size and scale of audience you need to have the launch result that you want? So if you're not sure about audience, I would definitely recommend doing some work around that. So whether it be getting in touch with your audience and firing them up about it, asking them some market research questions, whether it be testing your capacity to reach this particular audience to be able to validate your launch. So it might be some pre-launch runway activities like sharing some lead magnets that people who would be interested in the offer would be very likely to sign up for. And if you can go out there and get 200 people signed up to a free lead magnet, you've validated that you can reach the right audience and get them to take action. And then the final piece is having a validated strategy for your launch plan. How are you going to attract and convert people into this particular offer? And if you aren't sure how to map out a launch plan and some of those basics that go into validating a launch strategy, that is my free resource for you with today's episode of the podcast. Come along to the show notes of today's episode at tashcorbin.com/479. And with the show notes, I'll have a link to my Launch Basics program. That Launch Basics program is absolutely free for you to watch along. And it also includes a launch planner template so you can map out what that launch is going to look like for you. So come along to the show notes and grab that resource. As I said earlier, I'll also link to my waitlist toolkit waitlist. And if there are any other podcast episodes that relate to some of those competitive advantages and the validated strategies that I've mentioned, I'll also link to those as well. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Heart-Centered Business Podcast. And until next time, I cannot wait to see you shine. Bye for now.